Baku, SO, you're ready for the water. Stand by to thrust starboard. Brake, bridge, SO.
Hello and welcome to Crowd Science from the BBC World Service. I'm Caroline Steele, and we're starting this episode in the South Pacific, close to the island nation of Tonga.
So the current time is exactly 8 o'clock in the morning, local time, and we'll wait for our permission to dive.
This is marine biologist Professor Alan Jameson. He sat on the surface of the ocean, in a submersible weighing more than 12 tonnes. It's called Bakunawa, or Baku for short.
All lines secure, handrails are clear, swimmer is clear, you have permission to dive.
And Alan isn't alone. He's with pilot Luke Ziebermeyer.
Zeno, Baku, handrails clear, swimmer clear, all lines clear, clear to dive, pumping in.
The tanks on top start to flood, which is going to almost double the weight of Baku. Alan and Luke are about to go very, very deep, to a place few people have been before.
Right, that's us just left the surface. We're at about 25 metres now. And already you can see the sunlight starting to diminish. It's this beautiful shade of blue, which I believe is the only place you can see this particular shade of blue. We're approaching 50 metres now.
Why are we journeying into the deep? As always, it started with a question from one of you listeners.
My name is Watum. I'm calling from Kampala, Uganda.
So, Watum, what's your question for Crowd Science?
Well, my question to Crowd Science is basically simple. It's how is fish able to survive at great depth at the sea level, the ocean bed?
And what made you think of the question?
What made me think of the question is basically a scenario that happened 1 or 2 years ago about the submersible implosion.
You're talking about the Titan submersible that imploded because of the pressure really deep in the ocean. But how did that make you think about fish?
What made me think about fish is that how could they be in position to deal with these kind of pressures?
Thanks for your question, Watum. How can fish survive in the deep sea while a machine built to withstand pressure implodes? And what else do fish have to contend with in the world's largest yet least understood ecosystem? To look for answers, we're joining Alan and Luke as they dive to a place deeper than Mount Everest is tall, the bottom of the Tonga Trench.
Very excited to be on this dive today down to 10,800 metres, which will be my deepest to date.
Yeah, so this is the second deepest place on the planet, so can't say there's many people have done this.
No, indeed, I believe this will be the third time people have been down to this particular location.
I would say this is the deepest scientific survey we've ever done. So this is a bit of a record for me as well.
I'll expect champagne on the surface.
Oh, absolutely.
Alan and Luke have 4 ocean zones to pass through, each becoming more challenging as they get further and further from the surface.
Surface, Baku, depth 200 metres. Life support good.
Now that we've cleared the 200 metre mark, we are in what is often referred to as the twilight zone. Between 200 and 1,000 metres, the amount of natural ambient light is extremely low. Once we get to 1,000 metres, that's the end of all sunlight, so there's basically no photons are detectable after that. So this is the twilight zone because it has some light, but not enough for photosynthesis.
And that leads us to one of the difficulties fish face.
Well, the most obvious one is the darkness.
This is Dr. Edie Widder, CEO and senior scientist at the Ocean Research and Conservation Association. She's an expert in our first zone, the twilight zone.
When fish were evolving in the ocean, as they came to a point where there were predators that they had to escape, they could either evolve to swim faster or they needed to be able to hide. And in the open ocean environment, there's no trees or bushes to hide behind. And so a lot of animals were forced down into the dark depths to hide. Trouble with that is the photosynthesis occurs at the surface. That's where the food is made. And so a lot of animals spend their lives commuting, going down into the dark depths to hide during the day, but then when the sun sets, they come up to the surface to feed on phytoplankton.
Oh, wow. And I didn't even know about this kind of migration. Because you think about migration as being seasonal and across continents. You don't think of it as a sort of
Daily
like
event.
a commute to work, up
Yeah.
and down every day.
Yep.
So how far are these fish commuting?
Well, in the clearest ocean water, it doesn't get completely dark until you're below 1,000 meters.
Oh, 1,000 meters, so that's a kilometre
Yeah,
below
so,
the surface.
I mean, that's a very, very long and costly commute. So it would be better if you could shorten your commute somehow. And so a huge number of fish, shrimp, and squid produce light called bioluminescence, living light.
But that seems really counterintuitive. So to escape predators, fish light themselves up.
It does seem counterintuitive, but it's a form of camouflage.
One species of fish that uses light to its advantage is the aptly named lanternfish. Imagine you're a lanternfish. You're about 10 centimetres long and fairly plain looking. No offence. You're swimming around at night, a few hundred metres below sea level. You can't see any predators because it's too dark, but you know they're lurking beneath you in the deep.
Predators in the deep sea have upward-looking eyes and upward-pointing mouths because they're looking around.
They look up and see a snack-shaped shadow.
That'll tell them there's a food source there.
But you have a trick up your sleeve. Counter-illumination.
Lanternfish have these belly lights
You have photophores,
that are used primarily for camouflage.
and if you dim them just right,
Then you can disappear.
you become virtually invisible. So it's sort of like an invisibility cloak where fish are lighting themselves up by the exact right amount to blend in with their environment.
Exactly, and if a cloud goes over the sun and dims the sunlight, they dim their belly lights.
But how do they know to do that?
Well, that's a very good question. In some cases, we think we know because some of the lanternfish have a light organ called a photophore that shines into their eye. It's right above the eye, so they can compare the light from that to the skylight from above to adjust their light output from their bellies. But there's others that don't seem to have anything like that, and so it's not completely clear how they're doing it.
Lanternfish might sound pretty unique, but actually they're in good company.
Yes, about 75%, 76% of the animals make light.
Wow, okay, so most animals make light.
It's the rule rather than the exception, absolutely.
Fish, shrimp, even bacteria illuminate the deep. And it's not just to hide, but also to find food,
Built-in flashlights next to their eyes to help them look for food in the dark.
to look for love,
Light organs that are used to attract a mate.
and even to escape.
A type of fish called the shining tube shoulder because it's actually got a tube on its shoulder that squirts out light.
What? A light squirting fish?
Yes.
That is unbelievable.
Surface, surface, Baku, depth, 1, 0, 0, 0 meters. Life support, good.
Alright, so we just crossed the 1,000 metre depth contour, so it's now completely void of all solar light. So we're in what some people call the midnight zone. It's a term that is a little flawed, I think. It's what we call in the science game the bathyal zone, which is derived from the Greek word bathos, which means deep. And that's what it's always been called, and at some point recently people started referring it to the midnight zone. And me and my mate Tom, we did, excuse the pun, a deep dive into the origins of the phrase midnight zone and found it to be none other than Captain Barnacles from the Octonauts, a kids' cartoon. So the midnight zone is a phrase that's made up by the kids' TV show Octonauts.
Oh dear.
The final traces of sunlight have disappeared. We've moved from the twilight zone to the midnight zone, or bathyal zone, sorry Alan. To meet the fish that thrive here, we're at the Natural History Museum of Denmark. Nice to meet you, I'm Caroline.
Hello, Peter.
Hi, what a nice day.
Yeah, you were lucky.
This is Peter Raskmuller, curator of mammals and, importantly, fish.
So now we're unlocking the door to the secret basement.
Oh, secret basement.
Fishes.
The basement is full of rows and rows of shelves. On each shelf are dozens of clear jars. And squashed into each jar? Fish, suspended in alcohol. Individually, I'm sure very tasty. Combined, very smelly.
So which fish do you want to show me first?
Well, we could jump to maybe one of the really, really cool ones, and this is the deep sea anglerfishes. It's actually a whole big group of, I think, around 10 different families of fishes, but they all have in common that the first fin ray in the dorsal fin has been modified into a fishing rod and with a little lure, and in that lure there is light.
It's like in Finding Nemo? Is there an
Exactly,
anglerfish in
that's
Finding Nemo?
one of this would be the beast in Finding Nemo, actually.
The anglerfish isn't particularly pretty. It's brown and very slimy.
It doesn't even look like a fish to me. It just looks like a large liver.
Yeah, but you have to turn it around, and then you would see
smells.
that it has very big
Oh my god,
teeth.
that's so gross.
Here you
Oh
can
my goodness
see,
me.
Here you can see the light organ. I think we can conclude that they're pretty much ambush hunters. They just sit in the water column at like 3,000-4,000 meters generally and wait for someone to be attracted to their little light. Because the reason why they use this light is a lot of the small crustaceans down there, they produce light.
So this anglerfish is basically taking advantage of the fact that there's other species that light up, and it's basically pretending to be a different species, hoping to attract things that will eat that, and instead being like, aha, I'm going to eat you.
Yes.
It's a clever adaptation.
They pretend to have a little shrimp just in front of their mouth. Very clever.
Yeah, very clever and very cruel.
Yeah. You can see there's a lot of teeth also inside the mouth.
Oh, wow. So why has it got such big fang-like teeth? And it has, for its size, quite a big mouth, it looks like.
When you have a big mouth and big teeth, it kind of widen your buffet down there. So you often see that they actually might eat animals that are as big as themselves.
As big as themselves?
And they can have a really big fish in here. So for that, of course, you need some teeth to really hold on to, and you need a big mouth to get it down, and the stomachs can expand enormously also. It's because it's probably quite rare that there's a prey coming, so
You've got to be able to eat anything.
Yeah,
you
yeah,
can't be
yeah.
fussy and be like, a bit too big.
Yeah.
Because in the midnight zone, food is scarce. But it's not the only thing lacking. For anglerfish, there aren't plenty of fish in the sea.
Very rarely we do find some indication of romance, because some of them do actually have a little male.
Wait, so that's a male?
So that's the male here. We have a male of maybe 1.5 centimeters sitting on this 30 centimeter female.
So this little sort of
So-
nub sticking out the back of this huge
Yes,
fish
yes.
is another fish.
That's another fish. So that's a
What?
female and male.
So what's going on? Why is there a male attached
The
to her?
male, they are both spawned as an egg down in 3,000-4,000 meters, and then they go to the surface. The larvae, they live closer to the surface when they're really, really young. And then as they start to become more mature, the males, they have really, really huge nostrils. You should imagine almost a swimming nose, sniffing around for females, and he can smell the pheromones or something. And when he then finds a female, he just bites onto her and sits forever.
Bites onto her?
Yes. And it's getting so crazy that he's getting all his nutrients from the female's blood system.
Oh.
And all his other organs just vanish, and what is left?
Just testicles.
Testicles, exactly. So that's a very clever system, and so the speculation is that why would they do that? I mean, why did this evolve? And the explanation is that down in the deep sea, there's not that much food, so the populations are really spread out. So you can probably swim for weeks and months and maybe years to find someone from the opposite sex. And then maybe she's, no, I don't like you. That doesn't really work.
Can't be fussy.
Then the species will go extinct very, very quickly. So this is how it works.
How long does a male stay attached to her for?
We think it stays forever.
And if she dies, he dies?
Yeah, he will die as well, yeah.
In other words, he's a parasite.
To the benefit of the radio programme, haven't seen a single animal through the viewports yet. Disappointing. You never do, though.
To be fair, I'm not sure you've been looking that intently.
No, I've always keep an eye out. Kids' books lie to you, I'm telling you. Go for any children's book and it tells you the sea is full of animals. go in the water. What is that? Nothing.
Surface, Baku, depth 3,000 meters. Life support good.
Right, so we're now crossing the 3,000 metre contour. We're now entering what's called the abyssal zone, which is mostly the huge tectonic plates, the big, what we call the abyssal plains of the planet. The abyssal plains make up around 52% of the surface of the Earth. You have a lot of these long-lived deep-sea fish called grenadiers or cusk eels or eelpouts, and you know, these are big old fish that spend their time roaming around looking for food falls, which are carcasses that have fallen from the surface and landed on the bottom, and they're scavengers. They swim around and they redistribute that carbon.
You're listening to Crowd Science from the BBC World Service. I'm Caroline Steele, and in this episode we're answering listener Watum's question: how do fish survive in the deep ocean? We started in the twilight zone, where most fish have a commute that's probably worse than yours, swimming up to the surface at night to eat and swimming down hundreds of metres during the day to hide. Some fish cheat the system by using light to evade predators, and the deception continues in the midnight zone, where a lack of food has led to some clever adaptations, like the anglerfish using a bioluminescent fishing rod to attract a meal. And we just left Alan in the abyssal zone. It's perhaps the least romantic zone, full of scavengers waiting for carcasses to fall from the ocean above. We're halfway through the show, but already onto our fourth and final zone.
Well, one sandwich down, but we're over halfway, so I don't feel bad about that. You can't sandwich shame me into that.
I won't sandwich shame you. Surface, Baku, depth 6,000 meters. Life support good.
Yeah, so we're now just crossing the 6,000 metre depth. So we're now officially in what's called the Hail Zone, which is named after the Greek underworld of Hades. We're now inside the trench, even though we still have nearly 5,000 metres to go. Trenches are relatively steep, although they're much wider and shallower, I guess, than they're often depicted. Biologically, what happens is we lose a lot of the abyssal species, because if you think about abyssal species living on these enormous, vast plains that they can roam around all the time with very little change, very little disturbance, very little change in pressure with distance, suddenly you're ended up on a slope. So it tends to make a sudden shift in the types of animals that you see.
Well, there are a number of factors in the deep sea that life has to adapt to. One of them that I work a lot on is pressure. The weight of the water gets heavier and heavier the deeper you go.
This is Paul Yancey, Emeritus Professor of Biology at Whitman College in the USA. Listener Watum thought of his question when the Titan submersible sadly imploded under immense pressure. But the pressure in the Hadal Zone is even higher. So how are fish able to survive?
A common misunderstanding is what pressure does to biological tissues. The only type of biological structure that would collapse would be something with air in it, like a lung or a swim bladder. And that's the same thing with the Titan submersible. It has an air chamber, of course, for where the humans were, and that collapsed. What we found over decades is deep-sea fishes don't have any air chambers.
Pressure does cause problems for fish, but not in the way you'd expect. It leads to issues on a molecular level, because pressure distorts proteins.
So, for example, the weight of the water could push water molecules into a protein, like an enzyme that has to have a certain shape to function. And if water's being pressed into it, it can get distorted or get stiffened so it can't work properly.
Back in the 90s, scientists thought the proteins themselves must have evolved to withstand the pressure. But that only works up to a point.
It's not enough. Proteins like enzymes, for example, have to be able to flex and open up and, grab a food molecule that's been eaten and chop it up. So under high pressure, if you adapt to that, the protein becomes too stiff.
At the time, Paul was studying a tiny molecule called TMAO.
Short for trimethylamine oxide.
Trimethylamino oxide.
Trimethylamine. Trimethylamine oxide, TMAO.
You might not have heard of TMAO, but you've definitely smelt it. Because TMAO breaks down into TMA.
Trimethylamine, and that's literally the smell of rotten fish.
So there's one molecule that makes fish smell bad.
Right. Exactly.
Trimethylamine.
Yep, that's it.
Other than making fish smelly, the point of TMAO was a bit of a mystery.
And one time I was out with a colleague studying deep sea animals, and we were catching fish deeper and deeper down to 3,000 meters. And I kind of just wondered, maybe it could help proteins under pressure. We thought, well, let's just measure it and see what happens. And my students and I got these tissue samples and went back to the lab and measured TMAO with depth. And we sat down and plotted it out, and voila, it was perfectly linear, exactly the same as pressure with depth. So TMAO went up as pressure went up in a one-to-one correspondence.
So could you draw a straight line if you plotted
yeah, pretty much.
Depth versus TMAO concentration in a fish?
Exactly. My students and I were kind of looking at each other wide-eyed when we plotted it out. Wow, we're really onto something here. This could be one of the major secrets to life in the deep sea. But then immediately we want to know, what does it actually do? And so we have these pressure chambers in the lab where we can take proteins out of tissue samples and analyze how they work under pressure. And we tried the fish proteins, and then we found that if we add TMAO into the pressure chamber, they worked 100%. It just fixed the pressure problem instantly.
So it's some sort of magical chemical that helps proteins adapt to pressure.
Exactly.
And this is how it works.
What it does is it actually binds to water molecules.
TMAO binds to water.
It fits very nicely within the water molecules,
stopping them from squeezing into proteins.
It actually stops the compression of water completely,
keeping them functional and intact.
Fixes it right away.
And TMAO is perfectly related to depth. In fact, you could go fishing, catch a fish, and find out how deep it lives by measuring its TMAO concentration. Initially, Paul found evidence for this relationship up to 3,000 metres deep. But over time, he found the relationship held deeper.
We got a 5,000 metre fish, and it was right on the line that I had extrapolated.
And deeper.
7,000 metres, and brought it home and measured it, and it was right on the line.
And deeper.
Just over 8,000 metres, and it was right on the line as well.
So the question is, how deep does it go?
Somewhere between, say, 8,200 and 8,600 meters. Somewhere in there, the TMAO would make the fish just as salty as salt water.
There is a limit, because TMAO also makes fish more salty.
Our hypothesis was that baby fish can't go below, say, 8,500 meters or so, because if they did, they would need more TMAO. And what happens is if you make too much TMAO, it would start drawing water into the animal instead of preventing saltwater dehydration.
So eventually, too much TMAO becomes a problem. If a fish is saltier than the sea, the opposite of dehydration happens. Water from the ocean starts to move into the fish, which is very bad news.
And no fully marine fish can cope with reverse flow of water. Their gills and kidneys are all evolved to hold on to water. And the deepest fish found so far, just over 8,300 meters, fits well within our hypothesis. And that deepest fish was discovered a couple of years ago by Alan Jameson.
Alan Jameson. Sound familiar? Here he is.
So we're now at a depth of 8,336 metres, which is where we currently hold the record for the deepest fish in the world, which is a snailfish called Pseudolaparus bellyevi. And so not only did we find the deepest fish in the world, we know why they're the deepest fish in the world, how they're doing it, and why they're limited to 8,400 metres.
So you have no hope of finding any fish deeper than that then?
No. If it's deeper than that, then it's on a cellular level different to every other fish in the sea.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Chocolate?
Coffee?
To survive in the deep ocean, fish have a lot to contend with. Immense pressure, darkness, and a serious lack of food. Which has led to some weird and wonderful adaptations, like males which bite onto females and don't let go for life, fish which light themselves up to avoid being eaten, and scavengers that survive off dead fish falling to the sea floor. But all that can only take fish so far. To 8,336 metres to be precise. Listener Wattam, you asked how do fish survive in the deep ocean? And part of the answer to your question is, well, they don't. At some point, the extreme pressure is too much for fish. But it's not too much for Alan and Luke.
That's 7.5 metres above bottom. Water quality is surprisingly not good. It's really not clear at all. That's definitely the bottom.
Yes, that is definitely
5 metres above.
Alan is at the very edge of the deep, and the very edge of human knowledge.
4 metres.
In the last decade, humans have learned a lot about the deep sea. But there's so much we don't yet know.
Depth of reading 10,803, 2 metres to go.
And he's taking us with him.
And we can see the bottom. There it is. Second deepest point on Earth.
It's actually quite beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really light coloured.
Oh.
Down here, Alan is expecting to find sea cucumbers, sea anemones, and maybe a worm or two.
I don't think I've ever seen such a lifeless place.
But it's much emptier than he expected.
It's like being on the moon, isn't it?
Which, in a way, is even more interesting.
Finding out where things aren't is actually just as important as where they are. And they ain't here. Tick that box. Yep.
Another problem to be solved, as we try to understand the mysterious world beneath the waves.
Something coming into the viewport here.
While Alan and Luke finish exploring the sea floor, over to listener Wattam for the credits.
This is it for today's episode of Crowd Science from the BBC World Service. It was presented by Caroline Steele and produced by Florian Bow. Today's question came from me, Wattam from Kampala, Uganda. If you have a science question you would like the Crowd Science team to answer, do what I did and email crowdscience@bbc.co.uk. Thank you for listening. Bye.
I am absolutely starving after that.
So am I.